As the shuttle approached the human starship, Ambassador Zyric turned to his datapad and ensured, again, that his life insurance information was up to date. The starship was all curves and bulges in a gaudy patchwork of vibrant colors, with way too many windows and not enough weapons. The visage was made all the more cringeworthy by the sheer size of the human ship, dwarfing the sleek metallic needles favored by his own species, the Rundan, and perhaps even larger than the hulking angular dreadnoughts favored by the Malgrog Imperium. It was an act of desperation on the part of the Rendan government that Ambassador Zyric was being dispatched to the human homeworld in an attempt to elicit any aid. Unless something changed, Malgrog dreadnoughts will crush the remaining Rendan defenses in a matter of a year, 2 at the most. Watching the unlikely excuse for a starship growing in the forward view screen, Zyric thought back to his first astronavigation class. Professor Bizga drew 2 dots far apart on a sheet of paper with a straight line between them. Imagine you are a two-dimensional being moving about on this paper, and you want to move from point A to point B. In your two-dimensional view, the shortest path is along this line, x. If these are stars, x can be tens, hundreds, even thousands of light years. Professor Bizga then crumpled the paper into a ball. But if your two-dimensional self could somehow see in 3 dimensions, you might notice that another path exists, one that crosses between instances of your two-dimensional view, and this path is much shorter. The professor held the crumpled paper ball up. We perceive the universe in 3 dimensions. But in truth, the universe is a crumbled mess, having at least 10 additional dimensions that we know of. Astronavigation is the science of mapping out the crumple and finding the shortest path across all 13 dimensions, our 3 and the 10 others. He paused to let the note-takers catch up. A starship transposes itself out of our 3 dimensions into a different set and travels in that coordinate frame before transposing again. Depending on where you are going, you may be required to change dimensions multiple times to follow the shortest path. But beware, astronavigation is not just geometry. Each of the 286 possible triads has its own quirks that must be considered. For example, normal space, that is, the triad of dimensions 1, 2, and 3, is the only triad known to contain organic life. Conversely, the lost dimensions, the triad of 2, 9, and 13, has proven to be unsurvivable. Ships that transpose to that triad are never heard from again, and we don't know why. A decade or more back, the humans had come out of nowhere. Well, not exactly nowhere. They had been observed transposing out of the lost triad. The first few ships to show up were tastefully drab blobs bringing natural scientists and anthropologists. They seemed non-threatening and friendly enough. Then the big ships came. It was an invasion like no other. Not a military invasion, but rather an economic one. The big ships disgorged hordes of shockingly ill-disciplined troops. Haggard-looking officers in matching uniforms of black pants and pastel-colored short-sleeved shirts tried to corral platoons of brightly mismatched ground forces carrying no weapons but money. Lots and lots of money. The troops spread out through the planet, buying any small item they could get their hands on. Clothing, decorations, art, even pictures taken with the locals. The kitschier, the better. Over a remarkably short period, the strategy became apparent. The vast influx of currency caused rampant inflation, and the local culture and traditions got commodified and distorted to the point where the planetary economy became dependent on the feast-famine periodicity driven by the arrival of the human ships. By the time the Randan central government realized the threat, it was too late. Multiple planets had diverted manufacturing away from the war effort entirely, and now the Malgrog were advancing. The Randan had no choice but to try to turn one invader against the other. Ambassador Zyric moved closer to the view screen. Were those logs? Yes. Long manipulator arms built into the side of the human starship were grabbing one whole D-limbed tree trunk after another from a waiting barge and stuffing them into a round hole in the hull. It seemed to Ambassador Zyric to be a frightfully long way to come to collect a bit of lumber. But then, just because humans were effective at what they did didn't mean it had to make any sense. Once on board, Ambassador Zyric thought he understood why the humans needed more wood. The overly spacious hallways and common areas were richly paneled with wood. Even the solo occupant cabin assigned to Zyric had wood furnishings. Everything had a posh yet antiquated feel, not quite what Zyric expected in a troop transport. He was even more surprised when he discovered that a human crew member came into his room daily to clean it while he was exploring the rest of the ship. Vast spaces, including many of the bulges visible from the outside, held recreational activities for the ground troops. They ate, drank, played, and partied their way across the galaxy, traveling the lost dimensions seemingly without a care. Days into the journey to the human homeworld, Zyric was enjoying a meal under a vast transparent dome at what had become his favorite table, wood, of course, when he was unexpectedly joined by Captain Hansen and one of his aides. Captain Hansen said, "Ambassador, my apologies for not greeting you sooner. Are you enjoying your passage so far?" Zyric tried to discreetly wipe a scrap of food from his lips while nodding affirmatively as a crew member set the captain's and aides' dinners before them. Once he had his mouth clear, and not knowing how long he would have the captain's attention, Zyric jumped right into the heart of the mystery. "If it's not rude to ask, Captain, why do humans prefer to travel in the lost dimensions? And how do you do it when nobody else can?" The captain set down his fork and smiled. "Excellent timing. We'll have a demonstration momentarily. But the gist is that our home world, Earth, happens to exist near the center of a particularly flat part of the galaxy that we call the local bubble. Traveling in most dimensional triads, it is nearly 500 light-years from Earth to the edge of the bubble. It took us a very long time to realize the only short path to anywhere is through the lost dimension triad. But, like everybody, we lost a few ships trying to get through. After much experimentation, some smart people realized the problem was that the lost dimensions were already occupied. "Oh, look up. It's time for the demonstration." Zyric looked up through the dome in time to see some small projectiles shoot away from the starship and explode in dazzling flowers of sparks that slowly cooled into blackness. Just as he was wondering what he was supposed to see, he became aware of shapes. Many sleek forms, each tens of meters long, were darting through the field of metallic dust left by the fireworks. "We call them voidfish," said the captain. "They feed on metals. They prefer oxidized metals, but some species can eat through the hull of a starship, given time. That is why our ships are made out of organics and carbon fibers instead of exotic alloys. Using fireworks to chum for voidfish entertains the tourists." Zyric didn't know the name for the human economic shock troops was tourists. He would make a note of that in his report. The conversation had flowed through several courses of food and wine, the captain seeming in no hurry to leave, when his aide suddenly answered his handheld communicator before handing it to Captain Hansen. "New contact, sir. Malgrog Dreadnought transposing from 5, 6, 8, dead ahead, 8 light seconds." Captain Hansen took the communicator and held it to his ear. "Status? Who?" "Yeah, the ambassador is right here." "Why? Did they say please?" "No. I cannot abide rudeness. Please be so good as to hit them with a stick when they come into range." The captain then returned the device to his aide and turned to Zyric. "Captain already forgoeth this name demands, rather rudely, I might add, that we surrender our ship and submit to capture for conspiring with the Rundan." The captain looked up and pointed. "That's him, that faint in the distance." Zyric looked where the captain was pointing and noticed that the school of voidfish was already moving off toward the new source of metal. Just then, the ship shuddered as an entire tree trunk was accelerated into the void, leaving the starship at a healthy percentage of the speed of light. From his side, Zyric heard the captain say, "Most mass drivers accelerate metallic objects, iron or tungsten rods, for example. As a result, Malgrog defenses are designed to detect and divert metallic rods. They don't do so well against wood. One log won't stop a dreadnought, but it will ding its shiny finish a little and, with any luck, get stuck in the plating." The captain took another sip of wine and said, "You know, wherever you get schools of foragers, sooner or later, you will get a predator that eats them. In the oceans of Earth, it's humpback whales eating herring. Out here, it's Fluffy. He's been following us for days, eating the voidfish we attract with our fireworks." Just then, to the accompaniment of oohs and ahs from the assembled tourists, a massive something came over the dome from somewhere behind the starship and kept coming until it filled the entire view. Endless tentacles loosely flailed outward from a body that seemed to be interconnected membranes, a bouquet of jellyfish forming a single organism far larger than any space station. Fluffy follows us around most trips. Over time, we've taught him how to chase sticks. His food forgotten and growing cold, Zyric kept his eyes glued to the view outside the dome. At first, Fluffy disappeared into the distance, but as the starship continued on its course, that distance soon closed again. By the time Zyric could make out shapes, the dreadnought was just a cloud of debris, with Fluffy continuing to tease apart the larger chunks. Hundreds of voidfish were coming from everywhere to descend on the feast. As the humans passed the debris field, Fluffy brought the longest remaining part of the tree to the ship, releasing it just off the port bow. Captain Hansen took the communicator from his aide and once again held it to his ear. "Bridge, Captain Hansen. Looks like Fluffy is full and wants to play. Permission granted to throw the stick a few times for him. He's been a good boy." As Zyric looked at the rapidly disappearing remains of an entire Malgrog dreadnought, he mumbled to himself, if only the humans could transpose Fluffy to other dimensional triads. The Malgrogs wouldn't stand a chance. He almost missed hearing Captain Hansen saying, "Oh, we can?"